Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Hewitt. I am a marketing manager here at Telgorhythm, the only messaging API provider to automate the entire SMS and MMS journey. There is a ton going on right now in the world of A2P text messaging, lots of new changes, lots of new updates, particularly when it comes to 10-digit long code or 10DLC numbers. I am joined today by our CEO and co-founder, Aaron Alter, the legitimate expert in 10DLC, to provide some clarification on what's going on and how Telgorhythm can actually help us out. Aaron, nice to see you as always.
Likewise, Samantha.
For anyone who
How's
hasn't,
everything?
yeah, everything's good. Things are crazy with 10DLC. I'm happy that we're talking. For
Indeed.
anyone who hasn't met you, would you mind giving a quick intro?
Sure. My name is Aaron Alter. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Telgorhythm. A little bit about my background and myself. I've been in the telecommunication space for over 20 years, served in multiple roles at cloud communication vertical SaaS companies, as well as actual cloud communication API providers. We founded Telgorhythm to provide further transparency, education, and knowledge in the world of cloud communications. And we started off particularly in the area of text messaging to address specifically the changes that have been ongoing, we'll say for the last 5 years now, and continue to happen, and to help guide customers in a way that they could be successful and stay on top of these changes while providing a great experience for their customers. And excited to tell you guys more.
Yeah, awesome. So why don't we just dive in? This is a hot topic. People have a lot of questions, and I know that you have a lot of knowledge. So wherever you want to start in terms of 10DLC, we'd love to get, some intro and then dive in.
Sure. So we did a prior video, which I encourage everyone here to check out, where we get literally into the nitty gritty of how 10DLC is, but I'll try to summarize it a little bit for anyone here quickly. Essentially, there was no, first of all, 10DLC. What is in this industry? There's a lot of acronyms. 10DLC stands for a 10-digit long code, what most people refer to as a local telephone number, as opposed to, let's just say, a toll-free number or a short code number. But the nuance there is really the additional acronym on top of that acronym, which is A2P 10DLC, or application to person long code text messaging. What I mean by that is prior to recently, and we'll say recently over the last couple of years, there was no A2P messaging. That did not exist. Essentially, when texting was created back in the 90s, there was no internet or cloud communication like we have it today. And the use cases back then were for folks to simply message each other on their flip phones using their fingers. And the protocols that were launched back then by the various different network operators was called P2P, person to person, which did not require a lot of bandwidth or a lot of throughput, right? There's only a certain amount if you're physically communicating with someone that you can actually type out a message in whatever period of time. So they allotted about 60 messages in a minute, which is a lot. With the advent of technology and, communications became more cloud-based, and companies that support cloud communication APIs were able to tap into a virtualized aspect of text messaging, and businesses thought, hey, what a great way and a great channel to add to communicating with our customers. Everyone reads a text. You don't need to download a special app for that. Texts, even till today, are read and responded to at a much higher rate than almost any other channel, including social media, many times. And it's a great way for businesses to communicate with their customers. However, as I mentioned, when P2P or person-to-person protocol was created, it wasn't intended for businesses. And so that set up a number of issues, the main one being throughput, right? And while it's a nice number to have, a 60 messages per minute send rate, for me to communicate with you, for instance, Samantha, if I'm a business, for instance, that's looking to get out the word on something in a mass way, whether it's a Black Friday sale that I want to send to millions of customers and I want it to end up there this Black Friday instead of next one, or whether it's maybe I'm an electric company and I'm using text messages because millions of my customers just had a power outage, and obviously they would need to get the word out fairly quickly, and therefore would need a lot of higher throughputs than 60 messages in a minute. And so Therefore, this new protocol, there was a need for a new protocol with the advent of cloud communication for legitimate businesses to be able to communicate with its consumers. And that's what led down this path of the network operators essentially getting together and saying, hey, we want to create a proper path. The old path is not the right path for this, for businesses to properly communicate with its consumers, given the right throughputs. In the old days, folks would try to get creative. Maybe, hey, one number is a certain amount of throughput. I'm just going to get 100,000. And then that started to get a little wonky. And then there was nefarious players in that where people started to rotate numbers. And so, and that's the other side of this, by the way, in the sense that when the network operators had decided, hey, we're going to create this A2P or higher throughput path for businesses, what's to prevent, kind of the nefarious activity that's currently on P2P from, kind of spilling over onto this new A2P or business to consumer path. And so they realized that if they were to create this higher throughput path, each of these network operators, they would have to also have some sort of authority that as businesses migrate over to this new path, which is a requirement, it's not a nicety, and that's important to understand, that there would be kind of a checks and balance system to make sure that legitimate businesses are migrating over with legitimate use cases. And so the network operators ended up looking for a reputation authority to handle this, and they partnered up with a company called Kalera, spelled Kalyera. I got that correctly, who founded a subsidiary known as the Campaign Registry. And the Campaign Registry has contracts in place with all the major network operators, and that's growing day by day. We actually just saw 2 new carriers just enter the ecosystem, and we will likely see a lot more as time continues to go on. But the idea would be is before or part of the process of migrating a business off the legacy path, right, which is now improper for business to consumer communication, you would register in this registry system. And basically that involves a background check where you provide a tax ID information, your use cases, the samples of messages you're going to have, and then you're allocated and given a throughput there. And then you would then get approved to send these higher throughputs to your customers, so you don't have to procure hundreds of thousands of numbers, snowshoeing or rotate numbers. You don't have to deal with any of that. And the additional advantage of that is that the filtering that got really heavy on the P2P path because of all that weird activity is pretty much non-existent once you go through this path. And one other point I'll mention here is the intent behind this is more meant to create a cleaner ecosystem so that businesses have a proper and better way to communicate with the customers. In other words, the intent of this whole registration, which sounds all complicated, it's wonky, it's all confusing and everything, was not meant to be a barrier for businesses to get onto the system. It was just meant to set some ways and some guides and some rails to make sure that the businesses are legitimate, protecting the legitimate businesses, and being able to open up these paths for higher throughput and less filtering to be able to properly communicate with the customers. And speaking of which, that's kind of where this reputation authority has been towing that line. That on the one hand, they want things to be streamlined and quick for legitimate businesses. On the other hand, when you go through a process of streamlining stuff, sometimes it can lead to a situation where a not such a good player tries to take advantage of that and then maybe tries to end up sneaking up into this ecosystem. So I'll just take a pause there just to check on any comments and thoughts there.
No, that's great. Just for everybody who has heard of the Campaign Registry or TCR, they're the same thing. TCR is the acronym. So if you see that, we're referring to Campaign Registry. And then another note about something you've drilled in on me is that TCR is not about compliance. You need to be a compliant player to register your traffic, right? Can you give us some info on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's something I do want to actually stress here because it's important. So technically speaking, right, if it was just about compliance, why would there be a need for this new protocol, this new byway called A2P? Why couldn't they just make it that going forward, the same protocol still exists called person to person? We're just going to tighten it up. Not only does it include person to person, we're just going to make a way for businesses to operate on there. And we'll make it that if you want to continue going forward as a business on person to person, you have to register with this reputation authority. But that's not what happened. What happened is the network operators decided and said, no, the right protocol, the proper protocol is not the person to person protocol because of the lack of throughput need for businesses, right? It's only good for person to person. So they had to create this new throughput path called A to P. But then again, to get on it, it's the same compliance you really need to keep on P to P, on A to P, and they're verifying that. But the ultimate goal and what you're actually paying for when you pay for what's called a brand, which is an entity in the ecosystem, and a campaign, which is a use case, actually what you're getting approved for is a scoring system, there's vettings. What you're actually getting is throughputs, right? I can get a certain amount of throughputs. And then if that's not enough, I vet to a higher score, which gives me a higher throughput. So what you are really fundamentally purchasing is higher throughputs, because as a business, you need higher throughputs to properly communicate in timely ways with your customers than a private person in and of himself that's trying to communicate one-to-one with someone else. And that is the whole purpose and difference of A2P. So while there is this layer of compliance and registration, because they want to keep that path clean, let's not get it mixed up. That's not the sole purpose of this. It's not about being compliant. It's more of the gateway to get into this new path, which is the appropriate path to communicate with your business. They want to make sure you're compliant along that path. But in general, you have to be compliant even on person-to-person path, right? There's TCPA guidelines. There's mobile network operators codes of conduct. You have to follow, or SHAFT. You have to follow all of those things, regardless, even if you're on person-to-person messaging. Great question.
Got it. Okay, cool. So registration for TCR has been around for how long, and has it always been required?
So another good question. So when we say required, it's kind of like a loaded term, right? Because there's different layers to that, right? There's one layer that I could say, well, if you don't do X, Y, and Z beginning tomorrow, you can't send the message, period. Now, is that the definition of required? Well, let's say, take another example. Well, if you don't do X, Y, and Z by tomorrow, we're going to charge you 3 times the carrier pass-through fees if you still want to send a message unregistered. Is that considered required? Which one is more required than the other one, right? If you continue to send messages tomorrow, your messages will be heavily filtered and 90% of them won't make it through. Well, 10% can still make it through. So is it required?
Right.
The answer is yes. If you want to, until now, there had not been a sanctioned path for businesses to properly communicate with their customers. And so hence, there was no other path. You use that path, the old person-to-person path to communicate. Since the launch of these paths, so for instance, Verizon launched theirs back in February of 2020, if I'm not mistaken. And then you have April, May of 2021, where T-Mobile, Sprint, and AT&T launched theirs. Once they have launched their paths, now that is required, right? You have a business to consumer path. You're a business that wants to communicate with consumers via text. You are now required to go to that new path. That is simple as that. Even if they didn't give any kind of, some sort of, we'll say, call it a
Penalty.
punishment, if you will, or penalty, you're still required to go there, right? Because that's the rule. That's what they set forward to you to do. Now, folks that obviously are, and I would actually also add another thing here, which is important and something, that we want to stress throughout this conversation here. And that is, I think most legitimate businesses would want to go on this path. I think there is a big misconception. In some cases, it's actually founded because of how some vendors have rolled this out and there has been confusion. But the reality is, if you understand the fundamentals here and you partner with the right partner and set it up properly, this entire process is actually fully streamlined. You could turn up numbers and start messaging literally within minutes, fully approved messages within a day or two, and streamline all of that via APIs in conjunction with the registry and a good messaging partner. And so therefore, you would actually be, I think most folks would actually be pleasantly surprised, even if there wasn't a mandatory requirement, to why not do this anyways? It's more streamlined. I'm getting higher throughputs, less filtering, and better deliverability. Why do I have to necessarily need to wait for an incentive of having all of my messages being cut off or being charged exorbitant pass-through fees and being heavy filtered. Why does that have to be a thing? And that's a lot of what we try to get out there, that word out there, that this is actually meant to be easy. And we work very hard, particularly here at Telgorhythm, but the ecosystem in general, and the reason why the registry and the network operators have worked with the registry and the partners in the ecosystem is actually to make this easy and make this a proper way for businesses to go about this for everyone's ultimate success.
So it hasn't necessarily been required. It's greatly encouraged because of pass-through fees and things like that. You would think that you would want the higher throughputs, not have to pay super high pass-through fees. Why do you think so many businesses haven't done TCR registration if they are running 10DLC traffic?
I think it just goes to the point that I was just mentioning, and that is, again, I think there's a big misconception that this is very complicated. That's one. It's complicated to set this all up. It seems like a headache, a manual process. It seems there's a lot of fees, which, by the way, if you calculate them out, a lot of them are just one-time fees, and then you're set up ready to go. And even the ones that aren't are less than running unregistered traffic because, one, again, you're not getting your messages delivered, but also two, the pass-through fees are 3 to 4 times per message on if you're unregistered versus being registered. So it's definitely easier to ultimately go on the campaign registry. And I think that's really the crux of it here, is I think there's just a lot of confusion of how I go about it. How does it all work? And then there's another, and it's also founded as well, layer of folks are seeing a lot of changes, right? So as this rolled out, at least at the beginning, I'll say more towards the beginning, there were fees, particularly on messages, that were changing. T-Mobile changed its carrier pass-through fee. It was a lower at one point. They didn't do it for inbound messages. Then they did it for inbound messages, and then it was higher. So I think there is a segment of folks out there that's been hesitant to come over because they just want to kind of see it flatline a little bit, just to see what the full scope of it is. Whereas it still feels that they still feel it's not fully baked yet. To that, I would just say that things have slowed down in that area. I don't think the pass-through fees for the main network operators have really changed much, at least over the last 8 months for the most part. Yes, there are fees that have been put in place, for instance, a $250 non-usage fee from T-Mobile, but that's a separate thing. And if you monitor things right, you shouldn't have to deal with it. I'm simply talking about the actual fees for turning up on 10DLC and continuing to use 10DLC, you actually find are actually cheaper. We actually hear from folks all the time, either that we're on toll-free and we're thinking about going to 10DLC. I'm like, you know what, this is too complicated, forget about this. Or actually the second 10DLC came out and some vendors were like, you have to register or we're not even going to support this driver. We're like, well, we'll just go to toll-free, which is easier. And I'm sure anyone that's listening to this today that's on toll-free knows that the word easier is becoming a lot hard to say now on toll-free because you actually have potentially a much longer process and a much more drawn out process coming down the pipe, even now in comparison to 10DLC. And not only that, the costs for toll-free are way higher across the board. For instance, an inbound text message on a 10DLC is free on a toll-free number. That costs money in and of itself, forgetting the pass-through fees and everything else. So I think if you take a look at the specifics and the nuances on detail here, and we try to do a good job here at Telgorhythm in getting that information out there and keeping that updates there, you'll actually, if you do the math, you'll actually see it actually makes much more sense to go on 10DLC than even to remain on toll-free. And particularly now for sure, as many have heard, the industry is essentially cutting itself off. At this point, we've heard from many vendors, the major vendors and the major aggregators as of recent, whether it's March 31st or April, the end of April, at the end of the day, everyone can clearly see now this is going to come to a head very soon. And why even wait to the last second to experience a disruption when you could just start that process now, understand it now, get moving now, and then you're set to go and don't have to worry about that forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are hearing about a lot of deadlines from other vendors. I know that Telgorhythm customers we've always made sure that they are registered with TCR. We don't run unregistered 10DLC traffic. Clearly, a lot of other vendors haven't until this point. So it's creating a bit of a bottleneck maybe, or there's a huge surplus of people going to register. So I know that people watching this probably are in that experience now. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that and what's happening currently?
Yeah, so I don't want to call anyone out by name, and folks can, privately message us or DM us for any specifics on this. and we're happy to share that. But in a nutshell, let's talk about that real quick. So as I mentioned earlier, when the network operators partnered with this reputation authority, they wanted to help streamline things. They did not want it to make a lot of barriers for legitimate businesses to enter this new ecosystem. What they did want to do is create a system where the legitimate players can get in and the illegitimate players would have a tough time getting in there. What ended up happening was, and actually it was actually good for a while. So until early last year, I would say, if you were using the campaign registries APIs, or even as a reseller with your current provider, it's a whole separate conversation, you would notice that approvals, and I'm talking actual DCA approvals, which we'll get to in a second, were much faster. They would literally, in some cases, take seconds to happen. What ended up happening is early last year, unfortunately, there were some businesses that were in what is currently a prohibited industry in regards to TCPA, and that is particularly SHAFT, which stands for sex, hate, alcohol, firearms, tobacco, including cannabis. There were a few players in the cannabis industry that decided, let's try to see if we can sneak into this new ecosystem. And they ended up going to the registry and registering themselves or their customers as brands and campaigns via this streamlined process, and actually got turned up and somehow made it through. And what ended up happening was, we'll say in about the end of the second quarter of last year, about May, June, T-Mobile in particular started to notice that they started getting complaints from their end users saying that we're still getting cannabis related items that we didn't opt into on our cell phones. And T-Mobile took a look into that, and they noticed, we noticed that there is registered traffic that has cannabis messages coming across. And they started to say, hey, where is this coming from? How is this even possible? So they started to take a look at the detail, and what they were first looking at were the aggregators, or what's called a DCA. So a DCA stands for a direct connect aggregator. That means that there's a big ecosystem in the world of text messaging where what these direct connect aggregator, what that essentially means these are the companies that have built binds directly with the network operator. So many times there's different hops, right? Sometimes you could have 5 levels deep. It goes from one vendor to the next vendor, that ultimately makes it to T-Mobile. What a DCA is the one that's actually integrated and have built binds and connections directly with the network operator, so that when the aggregator sends the message, it's actually going directly into that network operator's network and system. Those are the actual aggregators. So, and that's what's known as a direct connect aggregator. Many vendors out there today, you should check with them, are actually not DCA. Some of them front that they are. And you can take a look at that online and see who these players are. I don't want to call any companies out by name, but you should check into that, because that's important to understand where your provider fits into that ecosystem and what benefits they're providing. Going to a DCA is not for everyone. For some people, it is a case, and that's a whole separate conversation. But the idea is T-Mobile started to notice, of all the DCAs that were peered into their network, one particular DCA is where most of this cannabis content was coming from. And so they reached out to this DCA. I won't call them out by name, but they're one of the biggest DCAs in if not the biggest in North America, and said, hey, what's happening here? And they essentially told them that you need to clean this up. The registry is doing their part. Everyone else is doing their part. You need to clean this up. And unfortunately, what ended up happening was this particular aggregator said, okay, what do we need to do? So T-Mobile said, you need to start manual means person, vetting every single campaign. There's no more automation where everything is just goes through some sort of a logic and it gets auto approved. For you guys in particular, you have to now manually have a person look at every single campaign, look at its samples, look at its brand, and then check a box and then enable it to get into what's called SDG, which is T-Mobile's actual 10DLC system. So in order for it to get approved into that system, this person at this DCA must hit approval on that manually, right? Now, let's say back in last June, as you mentioned yourself, a lot of folks are still hesitant to go on 10DLC, right? So like, okay, my messages are 50% delivered, fine. I pay higher pass-through fees, fine. and no one was really rushing. There wasn't as much the sense of urgency that there is right now. And so once you enable manual vetting, right, people are sitting in a back office, imagine a team of 50 people manually, doing everything now. So it started to cause some sort of a delay there, right? But as time went on, and particularly this past January, when the major providers, and everyone who knows who they are that's likely listening to this, announced that you essentially have until the end of March or April to register, all of a sudden everyone now has to register or they're going to be completely cut off. What happens? All of a sudden now you have hundreds of thousands of campaigns start to go up, and now you have that same team of people there manually processing stuff, and that's going to create a massive bottleneck. And that's essentially what's happened here, is that all of a sudden now there's a rush throughout the whole industry for everyone to get registered, which has now created a bottleneck at this one specific aggregator, and that's what's caused that backup. And just to add, this is also where this $15 DCA vetting fee came from. And it's unfortunate, but they didn't want to take the cost, right? You have to hire people to manually vet. Nothing is free, right? And so therefore they incorporated a $15 fee, which unfortunately gets, up back downstream to the CSPs, down all the way down to the brands. And that's where that is. Hopefully over time, they clean up shop and that'll be removed. And so that's essentially the root of where this delay is coming from and why it's apparent now and how it's impacting everyone, because you have to be registered in order to send the message, meaning DCA approved. And now there's this massive backup with additional fee there. And that's the root cause of where this is all coming from.
Yeah, manual registration, manual vetting takes time. We talk about automated registration. That's one of our key features on our API. Can you talk about how we automate registration specifically, and then we can talk about vetting?
Yes. So as I mentioned, there are APIs you can not only use, particularly in Telgorithm's case, and there are others, but in Telgorithm's specific case, and this is our expert area. This is all we do all day. We don't do hundreds of other things. All we do all day is 10DLC. And this is our area of expertise. And I'll also mention that we have very close relationships with the campaign registry. Matter of fact, if you look on our social media, which I encourage everyone listening here today to do, we actually interviewed the vice president of the campaign registry in the latter part of last year, where we talk a lot about a lot of these things. But throughout the years, we've built a trust with not only the campaign registry, with the aggregators. They know who we are. We know who our customers are. We talk with all of our customers. We understand their needs as a business. And so therefore, there's two layers to this. So as I mentioned earlier, the idea is not to create a lot of friction for the true and legitimate businesses that want to get on the A2P path. That's ultimately the goal for everyone. That's why they created the ecosystem, is for businesses to use it. And so when you're talking about registration, particularly in Telgorithm's case, our customers are all what's called CSPs, campaign service providers. You go directly to the registry, you get billed from them directly, you have all that transparency there. And in that process, you elect Telgorithm as your connectivity partner. And we have a tight integration directly with the registry. We don't see any of your customers' private information, as we shouldn't. Something you should look at, whoever you're partnering today, whoever you're partnering with, what you're sharing with them. We just get the approval information, and that allows Telgorithm directly from the registry, which allows us to auto import that information into your Telgorithm account. And then using Telgorithm APIs, you could then put your what's called your hooks in place and how we communicate with your application, port or purchase a number, and then we automatically in one motion send that upstream. But I'll add here, so that's how you kind of automate that. But then we have this manual layer to it that we just discussed. So there's two things that Telgorithm was allotted recently on how things are different with Telgorithm, because people must be wondering, well, how are you guys doing it? But no one else is having these these turn-up times. And so there's really nothing. We're very transparent about what we do. And because we've been in this game for a while, expecting the industry to move forward, and we've been peering, and this is what we do. So number one, because we have logics and technology we built in-house that actually prevents spam in and of itself. In addition to that, we talk, and we encourage everyone to talk with us. We talk with all of our customers, understand their business proactively. Some folks may look at it as a negative thing. You can't go to telgorithm.com, sign up for an account and start blasting messages. And while that may seem like easy thing to do. It allows us to talk to our customers. We like to talk to our customers, not just go to our site and we'll see you tomorrow when things don't work out. We like to talk with all of our customers. We like to understand what they do as a business. What are their use cases? What are their sample messages? What are your goals in this area? And we like to understand it to make sure that Telgorhythm is the right fit and that we could set you up for success before the fact. And that's what we're a big fan of. Educating, hand-holding, communicating with customers, building a relationship before the fact, not after the fact. And because we've done such a great job at that, that's allotted us trust in this ecosystem, trust enough where actually the aggregators have allowed us specifically for the time being to, while the campaigns are in the approval process, which used to take seconds, they could send unregistered. So for instance, if you're porting over numbers, we have the ability uniquely to allow you to send unregistered messages to prevent disruption while you're looking to get going. So you want to procure a number as you did in the past. Your customer is using our application wants to do that. They could begin sending messages. Now, granted, they're unregistered, so you would be paying a higher pass-through fee and it's still filtered, but you could send some messages. But the point is that would be good for short term. That's not a long-term solution because that defeats the whole purpose. Right. But the idea is that's the 1-2 punch, what I like to call it of Telgorhythm. So in the short term means 24 to 48 hours maximum. We allow you to send some messages while this is pending. Then that leads to the second piece. Because we've built a strong relationship and a strong trust in this ecosystem over time, we have been allotted to go through what I like to call TSA pre-screen. So we have picture that back room that we discussed with the aggregators before, where there's all these hundreds of thousands of campaigns loading up. We have gotten, because of our relationship, a TSA pre-screen pass where we go through a dedicated channel with dedicated people vetting that know us, know our setup, and there's much less manual requirement there. And therefore the process, while it's still not a few seconds, it's also not 6 or 10 weeks. And our average turn-up time, therefore, is 24 to 48 hours. If you have a clean campaign and we check everything beforehand, even ourselves, we see literally, I would say 90% of our campaigns get approved within 24 hours. The rest are within 48 hours, are fully DCA approved across the board. I'll even add to you guys that I think you're probably going to discuss this in a second. We actually, obviously, folks can remain skeptical in that. We actually have a path where folks can actually try this on us with no integration, no setup on Telgorhythm, where actually you could share a campaign, no cost, and actually on your own, see that for yourself and how fast Telgorhythm can get your campaign approved. And the idea is you're sending unregistered messages maximum 24 to 48 hours, followed by instant approval or 24 to 48 hour approval max DCA. You're now fully registered and ready to go. We even have status hooks that can notify your application instantly as these changes happen. So you could build that into your logics and the whole process is fully streamlined. And we've baked this in across the board.
Yeah, it's amazing. And basically, we know that a lot of people are skeptical right now because the entire industry is going through so many changes. A lot of people have had bad experiences or are currently or have been let down by their provider in one way or another. And we get that. A lot of you have been the customer on our team. We've been the customer before. And so how does somebody kind of demo that experience if they want to get a campaign vetting done by us to see? How would they go about that?
Sure. So what I would encourage everyone here, and I touched on this very briefly before, is there are these two concepts when it comes to the campaign registry, or two, we'll say personas. There's something called a reseller, and then there's something called a CSP, another acronym called campaign service provider. So first of all, before I get started on this topic, I just want to preface, because folks are skeptical and that's typically normal. And therefore what we always ask our customers to do is to not only check Telgorhythm, what Telgorhythm says, check your own provider. There should be trust but verify. And where you should verify this, and fortunately you can, is directly with the Reputation Authority. Fortunately, you can go to campaignregistry.com, go to the registry's actual website. They have a Q&A section. They have collateral there, and you could actually review that yourself without any biases. Like, what are the facts? What are the facts? This is the Reputation Authority that the network operators partner with for the A2P 10ELC rollout. What are they saying? And that is the only source of truth, not Telgorhythm, not any other vendor, you should go directly to the campaign registry. And if you go directly to the registry, you will notice that it says that if you are a campaign service provider, that means you have an application and you have customers that use your application, customers being brands, to send messages to their customers. You are what's called a CSP, not a reseller. A reseller is a completely separate persona, which there are use cases for, but most of the use cases are not what the typical customer that I just mentioned would equate to that. And I think there's a misconception out there that, oh, come to us today and register as a reseller. They don't even say that word. Mm-hmm. And we take care of all this stuff for you. Don't worry about registries. Don't worry about it. We got it all worked out for you. Right. What's unfortunate about that is, first of all, that's not true, because if you match up going directly to the registry as a campaign service provider versus using your current provider as a reseller, you were to match up step by step by step. There is not a single additional step you would do in partnering with the registry on your own and using your vendor as a connectivity partner, which allows you to multi-thread, allows you to own your brands and the vettings, build directly from them, get all that transparency. Literally, step by step, there is not a single additional step that is actually 100% false. In addition, there are some vendors out there that say, don't go to the register as a CSP, or they won't even allow you to do it because they say campaigns are not transferable. Well, one of the things that are left out, oddly, is, well, what about brands? So while it's true today that maybe a campaign is non-transferable, what about the brands and its vettings? Those should be agnostic. When you go to the campaign registry, you register a brand, which is one of your customers. That's a one-time deal, and that vetting applies to them. That is with you and your account. You're agnostic to any vendor that you use there, right? So even if your campaign has a specific connectivity partner, you still own agnostic. Reason a lot of these folks that are pushing reseller oddly leave that out. And that's important because even if today multi-threading, which everyone should ultimately do because no vendor is perfect, and if you don't have that concern today, in particular, you may have that concern in the future as you grow, and you might be entrenched in some sort of contract, integration, and everything else. And now when you're set to go to a new vendor, all of a sudden you find out you have to re-register not only your campaigns, but all of your brands and all of their vettings and all of their approvals all over again. All these that a hassle to do. That's also a lot of cost to do that. And so we at Telgorhythm, we only really support CSPs. That means you go directly to the registry where you have the most transparency and you get to multi-thread. You could choose one campaign goes to Telgorhythm, one goes to this vendor, one goes to that vendor, and that allows you to build directly, be agnostic, know what you're being billed for, being charged for, and grow that relationship directly with the reputation authority. I'll also add that there's a term that one major vendor uses called ISV, right? And ISV, for those that know this term, directly equals CSP. So anyone that is an ISV should not be registering as a reseller, should be going directly to the registry. And that is the benefit there and how we integrate ourselves and our customers integrate there. But that's the recommendation on that side, is why folks should go directly to the campaign registry themselves. They get the most transparency there and they get to own their own compliance. And there are RESTful APIs that allow you to automate this entire process with your vendor. And many vendors out there, and hopefully there'll be more, do support CSPs, including Telgorhythm.
Right. So if someone were to want to experience our expedited campaign vetting, they could essentially take, okay.
Yes. So to your point on that front, so I didn't want to set that up there about what a CSP is and what so now once you go to this campaign registry, and many folks here might have done that already, you could simply, nothing to do with Telgorhythm, you could simply, when you're creating a campaign, is you would elect your connectivity partner, you would actually see Telgorhythm in that drop-down list, and you would elect Telgorhythm. When you do that, you could just simply email anyone in our sales team, anyone in our support team. You don't have to be a Telgorhythm customer. And what we will do for the next period of time is we will then review your campaign for you. Won't charge you any vetting fee or anything to do with that. You don't have to sign any contract, no coding involved. We will send that upstream and you will be able to monitor inside of your own TCR CSP account exactly to the second, how fast it takes to get what's called DCA approval. There's actually a section there where you literally will say DCA no, will turn to yes, and you will see the actual timestamp on how long it actually takes. And therefore, you don't have to integrate against Telgorithm. You don't have to sign a contract with Telgorithm. You don't have to code anything. You just go directly to the registry. Many of you may already be there and leveraging that today. Hopefully, most of you are. You could just simply elect Telgorithm as your connectivity partner, send us a message. We'll scan it, get it approved, and you could see for yourself. You'll be able to test drive for yourself how fast it actually takes for us to get an approval for you on Telgorithm. I could assure you it won't be 6 weeks.
Right. Sometimes seeing is believing. So I feel like that's a really awesome offer.
100%. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we encourage
We're all
anyone to
about
do
that.
that. Reach out to us. We have a whole team of 10 DLC experts, and we're happy to help you and
Indeed.
kind of prove this out so that you can see that it's a trusted experience, because we know there's hesitancy and there are deadlines to come up against. So
Mhm.
everyone's in a hurry, but yeah, we have a
Right.
great way of doing that. And then in terms of if you are a Telgorithm customer, like you've talked about each piece, but how long does this all take overall, like from registration to the vetting? What does that look like for a Telgorithm customer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this assumes once you're integrated with Telgorithm, which is very quick
Right.
and easy to do, but assuming you're integrated with Telgorithm, again, you're integrated with the campaign registry, the max it will take you is 48 hours for full DCA approval. The shortest it will take is somewhere in 24 hours. But again, we allow unregistered traffic during this period, followed by registered traffic. So you're looking at 24 to 48 hours max for sending fully registered traffic from the time you submit a campaign to Telgorithm, where your customers can fully send registered traffic.
It's amazing. And I mean, that means that there are going to be zero disruptions for our customers. You can literally send messages almost instantly and then fully
Right.
registered within 48 hours.
Right.
Did you want to touch on anything about number migration or provisioning or anything else? Any other questions that you've seen lately?
For sure. Obviously, folks are looking or reassessing their different vendors today. One of the things, this is going to be a plug for Telgorithm, but one of the things that we offer is, I think a lot of concern many times is, I would be willing to migrate, but I don't want a disruption to happen during that process, right? And I'll just talk briefly about that and what that concern is and how Telgorithm addresses that in some ways in a pretty unique way. So when you have a port or a migration, it's more commonly known as porting. That's probably what most folks here refer to that as or know that as, is you have a carrier level and then you have the application level, the API level. Mm-hmm. So let's first talk at the carrier level. At the carrier level, when you port a number should always be live. There should never be a concept of it's fallen through the cracks, meaning a number is always live either with the legacy or the current provider or with the new provider, down to the last second. When you submit a port request, and this is in general in the industry, to a new provider, you're given, once it's approved, you're given what's called a firm order commitment. And that includes a time, date, and second that lets the old carrier know when the new carrier is going to take over programmatic and take over access and hosting ownership of this number. That occurs at a specific time, a date, time, and second. So again, there's never in proper porting, when proper porting is done, there's never a time at the carrier level when there should be, it's kind of caught in the middle. It's either with your old provider or the new provider. Now, assuming that's streamlined, and it most of the time is, where things tend to break down sometimes is that's all occurring here at the carrier level. But how does the API level know about that? How does the API level know what's going on at the carrier level? And you might think, well, why is that important? So let's assume I'm using vendor A right now. And I'm constantly sending API calls to send outbound text messages, API call, right? Now the number at the carrier level is with this provider. But if I port the number at some point in time, that number at the carrier level will no longer be with this provider that I keep sending API calls to. Instead, it will be with the new provider. And if I continue sending API calls to the old provider, once the carrier level has moved over to the new provider, I'm going to get errors and there's going to be a disruption. And that is the area where most folks get nervous and caught up. How do I migrate to a new provider without causing a disruption in process? And so the solution to this problem is finding a way where both of these layers can talk to each other. Where if the API layer knew in real time what's going on at the carrier level, you could button that gap up and create logics that incorporate those things, that transition in real time. And that is what Telgorithm has done. Telgorithm is integrated directly with the carriers, directly with the OSR code net number in real time. And we created a webhook, a subscription webhook that any of our customers can subscribe to, which will notify your endpoint in real time the exact date, time, and second that a number cut over from your old provider to your new provider. So if we run that back again, API call to old provider, API call to old provider, I got a proactive alert from Telgorithm to my endpoint that says number is now on Telgorithm in real time. Instantly, my logic is waiting for that, knows that, and now the very next messages, API calls going forward are going through Telgorithm. Hence, there's not even one single drop message during that process. And that is one thing that we always wanted, and we're founded by customers of the industry, that we always wanted, that we built here at Telgorithm to prevent any sort of disruption during that process. A simple webhook that we've tied in at the carrier level where you can ensure you're going to be migrating over without any disruptions in process. And that's essentially how that works from that side for anyone that's thinking about migrating. And by the way, regardless of Telgorithm, check with your provider, whatever provider you're going to, multi-thread with, that they have such a setup, and they should, and you should hold them to account to that to make sure that there aren't disruptions in whether you're porting new numbers or whether you're migrating numbers. But that's essentially how Telgorithm handles that side of things.
Awesome. For anyone who's, struggling with registration or vetting, is there anything else that you would like them to know, or anything else you want to share on this topic?
I would just say, Telgorithm, a lot of what we do, obviously we're a business and we're primarily a text messaging API provider. This is what we do all day. We're not about, there's many, many beautiful layers to the cloud communication ecosystem. And there are many of what we'll say other messaging API providers that do many other things.
Right.
All we do is just this. This is our niche. This is our expertise by our whole team. The relationships we've built are all structured around this to give us edge and advantage in this area. And therefore, I could confidently say that if you stack us up with even the major players out there today, even though we are a newer company, I would say that I would put money down that you would be shockingly surprised by experience you'll get at Telgorithm. And we set up processes in ways that allow you to test out Telgorithm with very, very minimal risk and pretty much little to no engineering effort just to test us out. What I would just say is hit us up, talk to us. We're always looking to educate, the ecosystem and customers. You might be pleasantly surprised by what you may find.
That's awesome. That's the perfect summary. And all I'll add is that, we do have this opportunity to test out our expedited vetting. So don't hesitate to ask us more about that. We'd love to show you and see how we can help you save a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of headaches, I think, from what we've heard. And yeah, we love this stuff. We have Aaron. He is so knowledgeable, and our entire team, has learned so much about 10DLC. If you want to learn more about Telgorithm, please visit our website. You can follow our updates by subscribing to our newsletter, follow us on social media, and send us a note anytime. But thank you.
Anytime.
All right. Thanks, Aaron.
Of course.